Natively Pod is a production of iHeartRadio in partnership with Reason Choice Media.
Welcome home, everybody. This is Angela Rye, Andrew Gillum, and Tiffany Cross. You are tuned in to this week's MiniPod. So, I don't remember how this question came about.
In Miami.
I know it was in Miami. And somehow we started talking about the shallow end and the deep. Mm-hmm. And I think Andrew said that it was safer in the shallow.
Yeah.
I wonder if that indeed is the case. And so I am hoping that we can discuss some of these. I have some questions that I want to ask y'all. I think the first thing is to talk about, like, it is frowned upon for someone to be deemed as shallow, right? Like, if someone is like, oh, they're shallow.
It's an insult.
What is that? What does that mean? Like, what does it mean for someone to be shallow to you, Tiff? What does it mean? If you're like, oh, this person is shallow. What does that mean?
That everything is surface, I guess. Mm-hmm. Like, if you can't even have a philosophical.
That one.
Yes, if you can be philosophical, but not philosophical.
Say the third.
I think that Tiff might be shallow today.
They cannot have a philosophical discussion. Like, they couldn't even participate in
and what we're trying to participate in.
We cannot have a serious podcast today.
They're making me laugh. Every time I look at them, they're making me
laugh. We're not even doing anything. It's just my face.
They can't have a philosophical discussion. I'm not looking at you all. And when you, like, they're not engaged on anything beyond what I would consider, like, BS issues. Even if we're talking about, like, celebrity gossip. Like, it stays at, celebrity gossip. If we're talking about rap lyrics, like, everything is just kind of, who cares? But can I say, though, I have a friend who doesn't read any news. All of her information comes from, like, Instagram. She is a mother, but she's, like, the embodiment of love. Mm-hmm. And I think these two things are related. Because I think it's easy to go through the day and maybe through life being joyful when you're oblivious to all the misery happening. And I've read this in a book somewhere, and they said that humanity does not function on human kindness. It actually functions on human callousness. Because if any of us ever truly confronted the monstrosities that happen every day, as human beings, we would not be able to function. So there is some safety, perhaps, in staying in the shallow.
But even your friend who reads, who doesn't read papers, doesn't necessarily mean that she's shallow. Are we talking about substantively
That's
shallow?
That's true, because she's not shallow.
Like,
she's
like,
joyful.
Like, intellectually shallow, or are we saying that is there more than one way to be shallow?
Yeah, I think people who find it difficult choose not to, or don't have the ability to see or understand subtext.
Yeah.
Like, beyond what is said and what is obvious, that there's a refusal, either deliberately or an absence of ability to see beneath. And there's some people, I think, who use the tool of shallowness simply as that, a tool.
Yeah, like a defense mechanism.
Or I will get you coming the other way. It's sort of like you won't see me coming. It's sort of like you won't see me coming. So you ever been in community with people who you may have relegated to the category of shallow, not deep, not the person you're going to go to for a real conversation. And then in an instance, you happen to listen or you happen to hear them and something that they have said really pricks your consciousness because it isn't on the superficial. It is, they sort of had a moment where they revealed that I'm as deep as you.
Right.
I can go there if I want to. I choose to keep this relationship where it is so that I don't have to do this, that, and the third with you.
I have experienced that, yes.
And I think that I have experienced people who have used the veneer of superficiality as a way to cover for what I've come to learn as a much deeper thinker, analyzer, and quite frankly, operator.
Yeah.
And an operator to their benefit, right? To in their interests.
One of the things I'm thinking about now, because it's like if you contrast between somebody who is shallow and someone who is deep, at least theoretically, or maybe they vacillate between the two. The person who I was just thinking about is Congressman Benny Thompson. He is not shallow at all, but he says things that feel very surface. Like he can reach you at USA Today and it has, you know, some Shakespeare-like meaning, and it doesn't even sink in like that until later. We were having a conversation recently, and I'll speak more vaguely, but I was in trouble because he felt like I wasn't reaching out the way that I should, and he was right. And he was just like, something like, you know, I was like, so I called him a couple of days later, and I said, I'm just calling to check in. I don't want anything. I just wanted to make sure you knew that I was here. And he was like, yeah, I'm just telling you to just check in every now and then. And he was like, he was making fun of me. He's like, I talk to your dad more than you. My dad calls all of them all the time. On a surface level, on a shallow level, it sounds like just tapping in every now and then is a very shallow point. But it actually isn't. Like it is, there's a ton of depth attached to it.
For sure.
When you check in with someone, it creates attachment. It creates relationship. And it ensures that people know just what's going on in people's everyday lives. When you don't check in with someone, you don't necessarily know they need surgery. Or you don't necessarily know that someone in their family is struggling. Or, you know, there are all of these different layers that you miss from what feels like a relatively shallow touch.
Yeah. Also, I find with those shallow touches, it might appear, if you want to categorize it that way, that those touch-ins also provide just that nugget. Like something happens in the course of that exchange that, again, might transform the battle that you might be in. He may not be as clueless about the battles you're fighting as you think he is. Maybe much more tuned in to it.
He never is.
And that moment where you choose to check in, he may be the salve. And something that he says may be the salve that you've been looking for, and you just didn't know it. I found with my father that while he didn't talk a lot to us, right, unless it was a directive, that when he did choose to say something, he was really saying some stuff. And I didn't always get it. He'd have the saying, "Don't take no wooden nickels off nobody." I'm like, what the hell is a wooden nickel? Well, you're right. They don't exist. There is no wooden nickel, right? It doesn't spend. And in other words, it's like, don't be tricked, don't be fooled, don't be, you know, whatever. I've shared this when I talked about my own testimony, where he says, you know, son, don't believe the hype. I'm like, the hype? He's like, yeah, if you believe what they say good about you, you'll believe what they say bad, and you'll be a slave to them both. And I had no way to seed that properly at the time. But his advice then was as prescient, you know, as ever. And if I would have applied it properly, sometimes you need the experience, to, you know, of what not to do before you can appreciate the, you know, the advice. But had I known, man, it would have been. But most people would have thought my daddy was just, his nickname was Sunny, you know, almost like, you know, bright and cheery. He never met a stranger. In fact, at my graduation, he's like, oh, too little time, so many people. You know, he needs to get around to you know your dad, right? He's got to get around and touch and meet everybody. So you just thought it was just happy, you know, good go lucky. And in truth, he was an observer, very perceptive of people, incredibly aged and wise, you know, advice. And so even in this conversation about what's deep and what's superficial, a lot of people who think they're deep ain't saying it at all.
That's exactly the point. They're confused.
They're very confused.
So Michelle Obama makes a good point. She's like, when she was around all these like heads of state and you know, high profile people, it's like, y'all, some of y'all ain't that smart. And I used to have that. I mean, we say imposter syndrome, but I think imposter syndrome is when a white man came along and told you weren't good enough to do something, and it stuck with you. Because you're not born with that. And I remember feeling like everyone around me must know something that I don't. Until you start talking to folks, and it's like, I actually know more than you. But what I don't know, I can learn. But you ain't gonna learn what I know. You know, some things that we know is just by osmosis. I think I choose to be shallow on some things. I have to go out of my way to force myself, because I have to be honest. On days, it might be a random Saturday where I don't read anything. I might read a book, a work of fiction, but my spirit does feel a little lighter when I don't.
Here's the question, because this is the second time now when referencing deep or shallow, you go right into like news, like or knowledge, and reading something. So your friend who you said is so loving, but you're like, she doesn't read anything.
She's not shallow. She's really deep,
right? So, but then you said on your shallow days you're not reading something. I wonder how we then define.
That's good. Yeah.
You know, depth. Like, is depth just book knowledge?
That's true. How do we define that?
That's why I said subtext, because I couldn't get to the knowledge place because I thought, I don't know that it is about.
Come back.
I don't know that it is about our degrees or what we read.
I don't think it is.
Or how much information, that sort of thing. I think it's like what you see is not
what you
get. The ability to sort of discern what you see isn't what it really is. And that applies across, the range of subject matter, so on and so forth, that it takes work to investigate a subtext. It takes effort. You have to put energy, the expenditure of energy, into trying to figure out what somebody's trying to communicate to you or what they're saying without saying it. So I think a lot of us really do choose in different relationships at different moments whether or not we just want to keep this there, or if we're willing to go the layers beneath. And so maybe we're not perpetually any of it.
That I think is so true, because when I consider the people who are like vulnerable off top, to me that's deeper than someone who is like, hey, how you doing? You good? You look good. Looks good. That's very surface. But someone who can say, man, I've been going through a lot, I'm behind on my taxes. My kid is struggling. Like they're putting it all on the surface, but they've done the work for that stuff to come out. I think that's so different. And that is a form of depth. And so that is my question. When we consider the space that we're creating on this podcast, or the people that we want to be in the world, is it really safer on the shallow end? Is it safer in the shallow for us than in the deep, where on the shallow end, are you really known? Can you really be yourself in the shallow when you're multidimensional and have all these layers? Like, is that really safe where you're not yourself?
Is it safer for you, Angela, in the shallow?
Hell no. I'm a Scorpio girl.
Yeah, you like to be in the deep.
I need you to stare into, see my soul.
Yeah.
I want to see yours. Same. And I would prefer if I didn't have to navigate through some crazy forest and some booby traps and stuff to get there.
What about you?
I think for people who I know and love, I'm like you. I want to be known, but I have to say that is fairly new for me. You said this to me a while ago. Angela and I had 2 fights.
We had 1 fight.
No, we had 2.
What was the second one?
The second one we aired. The first one.
was here.
So y'all know that
Andrew was like, can't we all just get along?
People in the comments funny on Andrew. They're like, I love the way Andrew handles Angela and Tiffany.
He's like, okay, Dad.
I don't handle.
No, literally the first one.
No, that's not true.
Our first one was over a guy. And you remember we were at lunch and
no, it wasn't my potential boo. That sound like it wasn't. You sound like Monica and Brandy.
The boy is mine.
Well, I was gonna say I must know.
And my fight was, he don't deserve your ass.
Yes, that was Angela's point. Was he doesn't deserve you,
not even to breathe your air.
Yes. Yeah. She was right, for the record. Yeah. But
imagine that.
No offense to listener.
But what? No, much offense if he's listening. But
I meant it. I said it.
And I echo it now. But what you said to me, which I had
She endorses and approves this message.
I'm Tiffany Cross and I approve that message. But what you said to me at the time, I had not heard before. The question hadn't been posed to me before. And you said, I wonder when you come home to yourself, ... It was some other stuff after that. But I thought about that. What does that mean to come home to myself? Yeah. Because I had been in the shallow with myself for a long time. But when you go deep, our other sister friend Latasha Brown said this to me. I'm gonna go from laughing to crying.
Me too. I got to cry too.
But this was good. Latasha said this to me. Latasha Brown. She was telling me when I was just going through a lot, and she said, this sounds mean, but she is a body of love, and she said it's like you have a bowl of shit, and you have put flowers on top, you spray perfume on top, and you present that to the world. That this is okay, and you present that to people who you want to get to know. But the thing about shit, you can't cover up shit, and until you deal with that shit deep inside, you have to clean that out first for those flowers to really bloom. And I hope this encourages somebody today, because that is when I realized, this is the journey home to myself. It's not this happened to me and I'm moving on. It's like, no, feel your feelings.
Yeah.
Sit in your feelings.
Yeah.
Sit in them.
Be your friends, the people around you reflect back to you who you are. See that ugly reflection and work on it and clean it out and come home to yourself, because you leave home and you go out there and work through all your trauma that your parents in childhood unintentionally.
Yeah.
And then on that journey home back to yourself, it's like, oh, let me get rid of this shit and let flowers bloom. So I'm recently in deep with myself.
Yeah.
But for a long time, even unbeknownst to myself, I was in the shallow.
Wow.
I didn't even expect to get that deep on y'all.
I like that. And I
So
appreciate
good.
I appreciate the trust. All right, y'all, we're going to take a quick break and be right back. I think for me, I definitely took a long way around to the invitation for people to know me more deeply. And one, because I didn't think people were that interested in the depth, right? It was, I sort of saw myself as a production wheel. What can you put out? What can you put out? Give me more, so that sort of thing. And therapy, largely thanks to Angela, and RJ's insistence of sitting down and just sort of figuring out how to come home to myself. And that when you do that, you're a lot less concerned about people's thoughts, perceptions, feelings about you, not in a disrespectful way, but just in a way that, you know what, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to do it because it's in my pleasure, not because this is what your expectation is of me, this is what you want from me, or I'm not in a performative state. But rather, if I come up to you and you and I engage in something at a deeper level, it's simply because it was in my pleasure at the time.
Yeah.
And if we don't get to that, I'm not being superficial with you. I'm just saying, what's up? How you doing? I hope all is well.
Yeah.
And
that's
I mean
not necessarily the shallow.
sincerely, and I'm moving on, and you should as well. We had a positive encounter because we did, and I do wish you well, but I didn't open an invitation to know that the world was upside down for you. Partly because everybody doesn't deserve that. Hadn't earned that from you. Everyone it shouldn't be treated to that. And I don't think that is a denial of yourself. I don't think that is a departure from who you are. I don't think that is putting on. Certainly, if you're acting without expectation. I'm not doing this thing because I want this thing to be said back to me in return. I didn't do that thing for you to compliment me. I didn't give that speech for you to be bowed over and say, oh, you're an excellent speaker. I did it and I said it, and it came out that way because it was in my pleasure. It was in my truth. I stood there, and if you get something from it, good. And if you didn't, that's okay too.
Yeah.
Because I did it not in service to that, but in service to me. And by being in service to me, that God knows it, I believe it will bless beyond.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there was no intention in doing it that way or doing it at all, and therefore it wouldn't have happened. So I think we choose the moments at which we have our reveals, whatever those reveals may be. And I don't want to judge them, those reveals. It's just that's where you and I are with each other. And we might encounter each other on another day, and we may be someplace different because you may be someplace different. And your expectation of me may be different at that time. But what I like about this conversation is I think where we're leading to is that we're taking the value judgment off of the shallow from the depth.
Yeah.
And exploring what it means, because I appreciate you saying this is
mean?
the second time you brought up reading something or like knowledge and what I perceive it to be, but that's not really the shallow or the deep. Like that's just,
well, it's a form of it. It's intellectual depth, but there's another kind that I think results in real human connection, right? Like intimacy, that people will say means into me see. And can you do that if there's a shell or there's a layer or there's a barrier that really, maybe came as a result of a very deeply wounded place, but has created a barrier that feels very shallow. We talk about creating a safe space here. We can't create a safe space here for our podcast if we're not safe spaces for ourselves as co-hosts and also as individuals. Yeah. And that is a regular journey and return home to yourselves. I also don't want to take credit for that. That's a Yachty saying to return
Shout out to Yachty.
home to ourselves. But it is a regular return. Like you think about going home every single day, you have to go and check back in every single day. Sometimes multiple times a day. Like, where am I, right? Am I still who I say I am? Am I, where are my conflicts? Where are my flat sides? Every single week on this podcast, I feel like there's something glaring where I'm like, oh my God, I see my hypocrisy here. And I'm gonna call it out so I can be accountable to y'all, our listeners, and keep growing. That is also a return home to myself. And you were talking about the reveal. We're revealing, we literally are shedding layers. Every day, probably multiple hours in a day. We're shedding these layers. And so my hope is that in this conversation that will never end, because we're constantly wading a little bit deeper, we hope that you all will consider what depth really means and how you can wade in and out of the shallow, but making sure that you know how to create safety for yourself. So that
safety.
Can I just say one more thing? When you were talking about creating safe space for co-hosts, to me, that's the easier part. Creating the individual part is the hardest part. Like being at peace internally and seeing your hypocrisy. When you watch yourself, when you hear yourself, and it's like, oh, that is something that I have to sit in, that I have to address, I have to deal with, I have to unpack and come out better on the other side. And I don't know that we have an answer to the question. It might not be safer in the deep end, but you have to learn to be comfortable in the deep end with yourself, because that's your home.
That is your home.
Yeah. Welcome home, y'all.
Welcome home.
Welcome home, y'all.
All right. Thanks for listening, you guys. Please, please, please remember to rate, review, subscribe, and tune into our regular episode on Thursdays. Welcome home, y'all. Native Pod is a production of iHeartRadio in partnership with Reason Choice Media. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.